Thank you, Jim. I'm with Félix Trinidad, brilliant young welterweight. And why are you here at this fight tonight, Félix?
Queremos saber por qué estás aquí tú esta noche.
Bueno, sinceramente, estoy aquí presente, pues.
There are rivalries in boxing, and then there are grudges that never die. Félix Tito Trinidad, Puerto Rico's beloved champion, was known for his knockout power, relentless style, and warrior spirit. But behind the gloves and bright smile, there were 6 men who brought out a darker side of him, fighters he could never truly forgive. These weren't just opponents inside the ring. They were men who insulted him, humiliated him, stole opportunities, or tarnished his legacy. When Trinidad speaks of these boxers, you can still hear the venom in his voice. Each name carries a memory of betrayal, disrespect,
Creo que ese primer día, 1993,
or pure hatred. And the stories behind these rivalries reveal the heart of a man who fought not just for victory, but for pride, honor, and the respect of Puerto Rico. Here are the 6 boxers Félix Trinidad hated the most, and why those grudges still echo through boxing history.
Which is very unusual. You have a great relationship with him.
1. Bernard Hopkins. The animosity between Félix Trinidad and Bernard the Executioner Hopkins wasn't just about boxing, it was about humiliation.
Good
Uppercut by Smith, yeah.
In 2001, Trinidad was undefeated, Puerto Rico's hero, and seen as nearly unstoppable. He had torn through legends like Oscar de la Hoya, Fernando Vargas, and William Joppy. He was moving up in weight, chasing greatness, and many believed he was destined to become the undisputed middleweight champion. Enter Bernard Hopkins. Hopkins was a cold, calculating fighter, methodical, defensive, and unapologetically ruthless. Trinidad had expected a war, but what he got was a lesson in frustration. Hopkins didn't just beat Trinidad, he neutralized him, embarrassed him, and finally stopped him in the 12th round. For Trinidad, it wasn't just the loss, it was how it happened. Hopkins made him look human, even ordinary. That cut deep, but the real hatred came outside the ring. During the pre-fight build-up, Hopkins did something that Trinidad and Puerto Rico never forgave. In front of the media, he grabbed the Puerto Rican flag and threw it to the ground. For Puerto Ricans, the flag is sacred. To Trinidad, it was personal. Hopkins wasn't just disrespecting him, he was insulting an entire nation. Even after retirement, Trinidad would often bring up Hopkins' name with bitterness. He admitted that Hopkins was smart, maybe even too smart, but also accused him of cowardice. "He didn't fight me like a man," Trinidad once said. "He just ran, grabbed, and spoiled the fight." That loss changed Trinidad forever. Many say he was never quite the same again. And for that, Hopkins' name remains burned into his memory as one of the men he despised the most. 2. Oscar de la Hoya. Few rivalries in boxing history burned hotter than Félix Trinidad versus.
It felt a little, I felt humiliated.
Did you know what was slowing down? Joe Louis told me once.
Yes.
Oscar de la Hoya. The fight, billed as the Fight of the Millennium, took place in 1999. Both men were undefeated. Both were handsome, young, and adored by their countries. De la Hoya represented Mexican-American pride, while Trinidad carried the hopes of Puerto Rico. This was more than a fight. It was a cultural war. Inside the ring, De La Hoya dominated for most of the night. His jab, footwork, and speed frustrated Trinidad. By the 9th round, many believed De La Hoya was comfortably ahead on the scorecards. But then something strange happened. De La Hoya stopped fighting. He danced, ran, and refused to engage. The judges scored the fight for Trinidad by majority decision. Puerto Ricans erupted in joy. Mexicans cried robbery. De La Hoya's camp screamed conspiracy. Trinidad should have felt victorious.
It actually took a very tough beating to get me out of the sport.
But deep down, the controversy poisoned the win. Instead of being remembered for beating De La Hoya, people remembered the fight as the robbery of the century. And that infuriated Trinidad. De La Hoya didn't make it better. For years, he openly mocked Trinidad, saying he was gifted the fight. He accused Trinidad of being a fraud and even laughed about how he gave away the last rounds. The rivalry became toxic, and Trinidad grew to despise him. Every time De La Hoya's name came up, Trinidad would grit his teeth. To him, De La Hoya wasn't just a rival. He was a man who disrespected him, who robbed him of his rightful glory, and who left a permanent shadow on his biggest win. 3. Fernando Vargas. If there was ever pure, raw hatred in Trinidad's career, it was against Fernando El Feroz Vargas.
It's not that these fighters are not throwing punches, they're just measured.
This wasn't about respect. This wasn't about business. This was about blood. Vargas was brash, arrogant, and never stopped talking. Before their 2000 clash, he taunted Trinidad endlessly, mocking his style, belittling Puerto Rican. Trinidad floored Vargas 3 times in the final round, leaving him battered and broken. It wasn't just victory, it was revenge. Afterward, Trinidad admitted he wanted to hurt Vargas more than anyone he had ever fought. He despised his arrogance, his insults, and his lack of respect. To this day, Vargas remains one of the names Trinidad mentions with venom. In Puerto Rico, the victory is remembered as a national celebration, not just for the belt, but for silencing a man who had dared to disrespect their champion. 4. Ricardo Mayorga. If you thought Fernando Vargas talked trash, Ricardo Mayorga was on another level. The Nicaraguan wild man had no filter. Before facing Trinidad in 2004, Mayorga unleashed a storm of insults. He called Trinidad weak, finished, and even mocked his family. He smoked cigarettes at press conferences, drank beer during interviews, and promised to end Trinidad's career. Trinidad, usually calm, snapped. He despised Mayorga for his lack of class, for turning boxing into a circus.
Mayorga lands a right to the body.
The fight became personal. When the bell rang, Trinidad punished Mayorga for every word he had spoken. It was one of Trinidad's most vicious performances. He dropped Mayorga 5 times before stopping him in the 8th round. After the fight, Trinidad didn't celebrate. He glared at Mayorga, almost as if the hatred still wasn't satisfied. Later, he admitted he fought that night with rage. He wanted to humiliate Mayorga, to make him pay for every insult. Mayorga had gotten under many fighters' skin, but with Trinidad, it was different. The hatred was real, and it showed in every punch that landed. 5. Winky Wright. By 2005, Trinidad was no longer the undefeated hero he once was, but he was still dangerous, still beloved, and still searching for one last run of glory. When he faced Ronald Winky Wright, many believed he would shine again. Instead, Wright humiliated him. The fight was one-sided from start to finish. Wright's defense was impenetrable, his jab constant, and his control absolute. Trinidad couldn't land clean, couldn't break through, and by the end, looked frustrated and defeated. For Trinidad, it wasn't just the loss, it was the style of the loss. He hated Wright's defensive, technical approach. To him, Wright wasn't a real fighter. He was a spoiler, a man who made the fight ugly and robbed the fans of action. The defeat forced Trinidad into another retirement. And for that, Wright's name still lingers in Trinidad's list of grudges. He never forgave him for being the man who showed the world that his time had truly passed. 6. Roy Jones Jr. Trinidad's hatred for Roy Jones Jr. was complicated. By 2008, both men were past their primes, but the fight still carried hype. Trinidad moved up in weight to face Jones, who had once been the pound-for-pound king. But what fueled Trinidad's bitterness wasn't just the fight itself. It was the years leading up to it. Jones had often mocked Trinidad, calling him overrated and too small. He dismissed Trinidad's legacy and laughed off the idea that they could ever meet in the ring. When the fight finally happened, Jones dominated. He outboxed, outclassed, and outshined Trinidad in almost every round. The unanimous decision was clear, and Trinidad was left embarrassed. For Trinidad, it wasn't just defeat, It was humiliation at the hands of a man he already despised. Roy Jones represented everything Trinidad hated: arrogance, flash, and disrespect. Even years later, when asked about Jones, Trinidad rarely had kind words. The bitterness remained. Félix Tito Trinidad was more than a champion. He was a symbol of Puerto Rican pride, a warrior who carried his people's hopes into battle. But behind the glory were scars, scars left by men who disrespected him, humiliated him, or stole pieces of his legacy. Bernard Hopkins, Oscar de la Hoya, Fernando Vargas, Ricardo Mayorga, Winky Wright, and Roy Jones Jr. 6 names that Trinidad never forgot. 6 rivals who brought out his deepest hatred. But maybe that's what made Trinidad the fighter he was. Hatred can destroy, but it can also fuel greatness. And in those grudges, in that fire, we saw the best of Tito Trinidad, the man who fought not just with his fists, but with his heart and his pride.